My name is Karl and Øyehaug, and I'm the Chief Financing Officer of Atlantic Sapphire. Atlantic Sapphire is the world's largest land-based salmon farmer, founded back in 2010, with our main operation here in South Florida, where we currently are in full operation with our 10,000 metric ton blue house here, while also being in construction of our phase 2 expansion, which will bring total capacity to 25,000 tons of salmon volumes per year. So very excited to be here and to discuss the important topic of the future of land-based.
So finally, and sorry for making you wait, Karl, but as Atlantic Sapphire, I just to give a little bit of background here, I recently interviewed Johan Andreasen on our podcast, and so we weren't expecting to speak to you today, but a lot has happened recently with Atlantic Sapphire. The Q2 results came after the podcast, and the very unfortunate incident at the Denmark facility last week. And the reason I mention these things is because I think everybody is talking about Atlantic Sapphire right now, and we thought that it was best for you guys to join our webinar if you could. I guess the question that I would ask is at this stage is if we take a step back from the noise in the industry as a whole, where are we at right now? There's always, in investor speak, there's always perception versus reality, right? Where is Atlantic Sapphire right now, and where would you say is the industry in terms of its developments?
It's a good question, and I think from our point of view, if we look at what's happened over the last couple of years, there is no doubt that Atlantic Sapphire has had some challenges that we were not expecting when we started out. And I think it was already mentioned earlier in this discussion that it is fair to expect that it will be somewhat of a bumpy road, but we do feel that we have had more bumps in the road than what we could expect. And I think for us, the biggest topic of the last 2 years has been that we've had considerable construction-related issues. And this has had an effect on our ability to provide our fish with the right conditions, and therefore also to deliver on the volume side, which directly results in financial performance. So there is no doubt that it's been a tough start to the year. For example, for us, we've had breakdowns of everything from our chiller plant, equipment that was not delivered according to spec. And as a result, it's only in the last couple of months that we've had stable operating conditions throughout the farm, and where we finally can give the fish the conditions they need to thrive. So for us, for example, the initial batches, they haven't had those conditions that are necessary to really show the true potential of land-based salmon farming. But the positive is that now all of those ramp-up issues have been fixed. Risk is considerably lower in our day-to-day production, and the batches of salmon that were introduced from the middle of 2020, those will raise the bar on what performance is going to be like. So we expect that when we start harvesting those batches in the middle of next year, you will really see what the industry can aim for here, and what unit economics really look like. And I think a very important point that was mentioned by Maggie is that, yes, these types of projects, they are very capital intensive. It does require a lot of capex to build the facilities, and the only way to make them profitable is to take advantage of economies of scale. You will not be able to build a small RAS salmon farm and make it work financially. That is simply not possible due to the very high fixed cost nature of this business. In order for this to succeed, and I think that Atlantic Sapphire has made this clear to many investors, in order to succeed, you need a certain set of attributes to the company. You need the right team, you need the right location with the right naturally given conditions, specifically water intake and discharge. You need to have the right construction partners, because this is not a small-scale smolt farm somewhere in Norway, which has been done 100 times before. This is large-scale infrastructure that requires completely different skills. And last but not least, we've seen that having experience is so important. We've been doing this for 10 years. And even though we've been doing this for 10 years, we still stumble upon unexpected challenges. So in order for this to succeed, you need all of those factors. And I think that over the last year, especially, investors have become more and more educated on what to look for when evaluating projects. And we are quite confident that many of those 100+ projects that you identified, Matt, in your research, most of those will never happen. And out of those that will be built, unfortunately, many of these will fail, because the reality is that farming salmon on land in RAS systems is not easy. And I think that it's positive for investors that the last couple of years, with the industry moving at a very fast pace, has made it possible for the investors to understand the risk factors better, so that we avoid investors investing in projects that maybe might not succeed at the end of the day.
Right. That's a good answer. Thank you. And I guess, speaking on behalf of the project developers, I think that you carry the entire weight of an industry on your shoulders. And people are just looking at Atlantic Sapphire and if it's going to work, when it's going to work. What type of, and the news flow, I think, totally dictates investor sentiment. What would you say are going to be the messages that you would be giving to the outside world later this year? It sounds like you're gearing up to larger harvest volumes for 2022, but what kind of messages can investors expect to listen to later this year from Atlantic?
Yes, so it's definitely true that being publicly listed and having to notify the outside world of everything that happens in the company basically has its pros and cons. And I think that there is no doubt that when we have negative events, such as a fire, such as an incident, which unfortunately has happened 2 times too much this year, then that is something that really overshadows all of the very important positive developments that happen day to day in our operations. We are now operating more than 12 independent systems, all stocked with fish, and we are day to day seeing more and more stable operations. To repeat an earlier point, what investors can expect is to really see biological KPIs on the new batches of salmon we have in our US facility that have actually had the conditions that we know as salmon farmers they need in order to deliver biologically. So what we will be doing over the next 12 months until we are in full steady state production in phase 1 is to give the investor community KPIs on how things are going, how are growth curves looking, how is biomass gain looking, to make it easier for people to track the positive developments, because at the end of the day, the reality with salmon farming is that there is a long life cycle from egg to harvestable fish. So we're going to develop our reporting even further to make it easier to follow everything from all the positives we're seeing on the demand side, which we can probably talk about later, but also most importantly on the biological side, because the financial story in land-based is all about producing sufficient volumes to justify the high upfront costs. And we can fortunately see positive indicators of that biological performance a long time before the actual harvest of the fish happens.
So, Karl, I'm going to start with you, and let's perhaps to get through lots of questions. Let's answer slightly briefer answers, but maybe we can get through as many as we can. One question is, you made a comment about the small salmon in RAS not being viable. What would be too small for you? What do you think is the minimum amount of capacity for a viable project?
Well, that's a good question, and unfortunately there isn't one true answer to it. But what I can say is that out of the land-based salmon farms in the world today, which most of them are in what I call the R&D size, 500 tons, maybe 1,000 tons of annual production, none of those are making money. So in other words, the answer is much higher than that. We know that our Danish facility was approximately at the size where you can make a decent profit if you're able to sell the fish at a premium. So that's a 2,400 ton facility. But even then, it's unless you have a price premium, it is difficult to be cost competitive with the conventional industry. So I think that the answer to the question is much closer to what we're doing in the US, where we are comfortable we will deliver a significant profit on phase one alone. And as you add more capacity, that's when you really see the true potential of unit economics. Our long-term ambition is to be the lowest cost producer of salmon delivered in the US. And we are very confident that we will get there in a not too distant future.
Okay, thank you. And a quick follow-on question. Some other companies report biomass kilo per cubic meter of growth. Is that something that Atlantic Sapphire does? And do you have a number for that?
Yes, we're actually the ones who invented that metric and called it the JEA index back in the day. So we do. And to give the answer, our phase one in the US, for example, when we were at full steady state production, which will be in the middle of next year, we'll have 0.47 in production per cubic meter per day. So that is what we're targeting. We're still ramping up the biomass, which means we don't have full utilization of the facility yet. So numbers are naturally lower, but that is where we're heading.
Thank you. I'm going to move on. And Atlantic Sapphire questions. We've had a couple of questions, Karl, on when Atlantic Sapphire is likely to reach positive cash flow. Do you have a comment for that? I know it depends on prices as well, which is crystal ball stuff. But
yeah, no, exactly. You can never guarantee anything, but I think we have a very good view on that. And if you think about the two parts of the equation, the price achievement, there we've seen consistently over the last year with harvest volumes in the US that we are achieving solid premium pricing. Those have been remarkably steady, so we also expect that going forward. Then it comes down to the other part, which is the cost per kilo, which you need in order to be profitable, and that one is 100% connected to the total volumes you're producing, because this is a fixed cost business. The only true variable cost is your feed. So we will be profitable as soon as we get into steady state production, which is going to be in the middle of next year. So that's when you can also expect to see a positive EBITDA and a positive cash flow from our US phase one standalone.
Right. And just to add my own question to that, I think the Denmark facility, there have been incidents over the years, but you have actually achieved steady state. And I remember Johan telling me about this on the call, but you've had quite a few quarters of steady state production, right? Does that give you an indication that the same can be achieved in Miami? And I guess in an improved facility, because as Erik said, the technology, each generation of technology is better than the last.
Absolutely. So Denmark was, when it's been in the state, has shown us that we can get costs down to the fixed costs down to a very manageable level, so that as long as we're producing close to the nameplate capacity that farm had and selling the fish at decent prices, then that can be a profitable business. And in the US, it's even easier to reach that profitable level because of the price premium that you're achieving in the US market. So Denmark has definitely proven that point, and it's been an important proof of concept for us to do this large scale in the US, to really see those key cost elements in action, and then it's much easier for us to execute here in the US, knowing that what success will look like.
So Karl, I'm going to come back to you. There's one comment, it's not a question. Eminent expert said in 2016 that it would be impossible to run a massive RAS salmon farm in southern Florida. Everything is impossible until someone is doing it. So,
true statement.
Yes. Another question we have is, before the last week, Atlantic Sapphire was talking about the robustness of steelhead in a RAS facility, and I think the plan was to do that in Denmark. Does that still figure somewhere in Atlantic Sapphire's plans?
The trout test and trial project unfortunately ended, the trout being at the wrong place at the wrong time. But I think what we saw from those months of testing was promising, and there was nothing that we saw of data that convinced us the trout is not a potentially interesting species for RAS farming in the future. It's not priority for us. Our priority is and has always been farming Atlantic salmon. But if you look long term, it could potentially be a secondary route. There is a lot of advantages with the trout, just like with, for example, the yellowtail. It's more robust than the salmon, which is an advantage in RAS. And maybe most importantly, it's a species that grows fast, which allows you to get a higher turnover of your biomass, and hence also lower cost per kilo. So it's something that is not off the table for us, but I wouldn't call it a strategic priority by any means at this point.
And actually, that's a great segue into the next question. There was a question about the constraints, which we've been constantly told about in the industry, of skilled personnel with expertise. And I think, Karl, I'm going to ask you this question because I know that the Atlantic Sapphire alluded to this in the Q2 results, but just perhaps give us a sense of this difficulty, the bottleneck of skilled people to run these facilities, and how do you think that will improve in the future or will continue to be a constraint?
I think definitely the answer is that will be a constraint. So Atlantic Sapphire spent 10 years building up its own team that has not only brought some of the smartest brains from the RAS industry to our company, but also built up in-house competency with many years of operating multiple independent systems. And that is truly something we think is unique about Atlantic Sapphire, that we have so much brain power, so much knowledge in one place, because there are very few people in the industry that really know how to design and how to operate advanced system like a RAS system. And the issue is that not only are there new land-based projects out there that will require those people, but also you have strong demand from the incumbent industry that is building land-based facilities. They're, as a matter of fact, the biggest investor in land-based, with the giant investments being made in post-smolt. So definitely it's going to be a very scarce resource, and one that will put a limitation on supply growth for the next 10 years. I think it's going to take a lot of time to develop more people because this is not easy. This is something that really requires a lot of experience. And in our opinion, what we're doing is developing our Bluehouse technology into being much more of a process industry that allows for automation, that allows for much less room for human errors, and much more processes that would be similar to what you see in an oil refinery. So I think that is where we're heading to really create the salmon farming of the future.
Yeah, no, perfect. And I'm going to add my own question very quickly. I guess, how many, this is, just say no if you don't want to answer this question, but what we've seen is that you get, often these projects are run by people who run smolt facilities for conventional salmon farmers, and they're appointed from Chile, where I'm sat, or from Norway, and that's your chief technician. How many groups out there do you think can realistically make a facility work without some pretty serious issues, that have the in-house skill to make this work?
Well, it's very hard to give a number to that, but I think reading between the line on your question, you're inferring the right thing, that there is very few people who can do it. And to take it one step further, what we've seen, having operated full grow-out systems for multiple years, is that not all the conventional industry wisdom from freshwater RAS is transferable to what we're doing. So I would even question if some of the smartest minds from the smolt industry are able to successfully farm salmon all the way to harvestable size, because that is, in fact, very different.
Finally, Karl, same question to you, and we'll wrap it up.
I think that we as a company, we are 100% sure that land-based salmon farming will succeed and it will become financially viable. And we're just months away from seeing that happen, which is very exciting. That being said, we're also quite sure that it's going to take a long time before land-based salmon farming is a real supply contributor to the global volumes. We think that in the next 5 years, we will be farming 75% of all global land-based salmon farming volumes. And we think that within the next 10 years, there won't be a lot of production all in all and a lot of harvest volumes. But that being said, and food for thought is what can happen 10 to 20 to 30 years from now. Then we think that the potential is enormous, and it's going to be very interesting to follow the industry over the next 2 decades.